Hi, I'm Wendy Turner, Executive Director of Michigan Public. You might have heard that public media is under threat. You're not wrong. But I come to tell you that your voice has power. Visit protectmypublicmedia.org, contact your lawmakers, and take a stand today.
From Michigan Public, this is It's Just Politics. I'm Zoe Clark.
And I'm Rick Pluta. And we are in lame duck.
It is that period of time post-election, but before new lawmakers are sworn in the new year.
And in that new year, Democrats in Lansing lose their trifecta with an incoming Republican-led House.
So in theory, right, now would be the time for Democrats to flex their legislative muscle, to get all the remaining things done that they've wanted to do this legislative session.
But that is not exactly happening.
On today's show, why Democrats are not taking full advantage of the final days of this first in a 4-decade opportunity. 2 Capitol reporters are here to break it down, but we will start with a first-hand source who's in the midst of what's happening or not happening in Lansing. Representative Rachel Hood is a Democrat.
We continue to have issues with attendance that keep us from doing important work for the people of Michigan.
Hood says not showing up to session has been an issue, but she says there's more.
Further, on several of the votes that we have left to the lame duck period, the coalition of 56 is breaking down.
Hood and I spent a few more minutes talking, Rick, and I asked her to explain what's going on with attendance and voting and why she's calling Lansing right now toxic.
We have a very slim majority in the House with just 56 Democratic members. So when one member doesn't show up, it often makes it difficult to be able to move legislation. Obviously, if we can't get all of our membership to the floor on a given day, we really cannot pass Democratic legislation.
Is it fair to say you said to Speaker Tate, look, if you can't get the rest of your caucus members to show up, I'm going to stop showing up. And again, because of this slim majority that Democrats have, it would really stop votes from happening.
That's right. You know, I feel like I've done everything that I can for my fellow members to make sure that their legislation is a success. If I'm a deciding vote, you betcha I'm going to be there for meaningful work. Things like fixing our auto no-fault fix, tipping fees. I have the Drive Safe bills. I have one of those bills. I've been carrying it for 6 years. This bill is hard, but immigrants across the state are asking us to help protect them in a political climate where they may be deported and exited from the state. These are critical issues for the success of Michigan moving forward. And if I have to hold my vote on, small fixes to some part of the insurance code that isn't going to make a big difference, or, some small fix on banking, I will. My values call me to do the hard work and to be there for my colleagues when they need me. I'll be present for that. What I'm not going to be present for is showing up, getting abused. Literally last week, the sergeants had to separate a member who was yelling at me on the floor. That's not professional behavior, and I won't tolerate being a part of that. And at the same time, being told that my bills are not going to be considered and that the people I'm representing will not be considered. That approach lacks professionalism, in my opinion.
Representative, you told Bridge, Michigan that Lansing was, quote, toxic.
Yes.
What's going on?
There is very little accountability for the behaviors of individuals and very little courage to do anything but remain silent when people aren't doing their jobs, or when people are behaving poorly, or when there is disagreement. There is very little opportunity to sit down with each other and have meaningful conversations where we can begin to understand each other. Most of the conversations that my colleagues and I are having consist of 2 minutes on the floor. Those systems don't work for any of us, and they're failing the people of Michigan. It makes for a toxic environment.
Representative, you did not run for office again. That means you'll not be back in Lansing in the legislature. Is that part of why you're speaking out now in such an open manner?
Yes.
Is there anything that you think can be done in these final few weeks?
I do think we have some spectacular leaders in the legislature, and I remain hopeful that we will all be called to our highest selves, that we will continue to challenge each other in positive ways, and that we will put individualism aside and find paths forward together.
That's Representative Rachel Hood. Thanks so much for the time.
Of course. Thank you for your good work.
So let's bring in Jordyn Hermani and Simon Schuster, Capitol reporters at Bridge, Michigan. We turn to them to try to make sense of all of this. Hey, you two.
How's
it going?
So, Jordyn, Representative Hood there says Lansing is toxic. What is going on?
Yeah, well, Democrats have really struggled to be able to hold session this year, frankly. I mean, out of the number of days that there's been this year, the House has actually only voted about 71 of those days. They're on track for the least amount of times voted in Governor Gretchen Whitmer's tenure. And that's mostly because it seems like following the election, they're just not certain the direction that they want to go in. There are certain Democrats who say that there are must-move priority issues. If everyone will remember the trifecta, legislative trifecta for the first time since the 80s. That's going to go away come January. Republicans have taken control of the House. So a lot of Democrats feel like there's a lot to move on. Meanwhile, the Democrats in charge of actually bringing things to the floor have held things really, really close to the vest. And we're all sort of left wondering, well, if there's a lot to work on, what's going to be first on the block? And right now, we really don't have any sort of indication, which is just as frustrating, it seems, for reporters as it is for those taking the votes.
Simon, is this about willingness to show up to work? Is it about being able to get the Democratic caucus to all agree on some bills to put up on the board for votes? Is it, at this point, frustration now over losing majority? Or is it maybe all of the above?
I think all of the above is probably going in the right direction here. We're sort of peeling back the curtain now on this trifecta government. It's always interesting, or I should say the beautiful thing about covering divided government, right, is that the legislature will say they want one thing, the governor will say they want the other, and then if somebody's acting in bad faith, we generally hear them come out in public and, accuse the others of various things. In a trifecta government, we didn't really have that. It was a lot of dealing behind closed doors, a lot of horse trading out of the public eye, and so the sausage was made, but largely out of public view. And now finally, we're sort of seeing the innards here. We're seeing how this process is playing out and a fraying of Democrats' electoral coalition. There's long been sort of a more progressive contingent within the Democratic Party that is, especially in the House, that is frustrated by leadership in the Michigan House that they see maybe as too deferential to special interests, too interested in a business agenda, and not looking at sort of some of these big bites out of the apple that they're hoping to get done and have been waiting with increasing consternation to get done throughout this legislative session. And finally, I think we're starting to see that frustration come to the fore.
This writing has been on the wall, frankly, for quite some time. We remember last year there was issues in passing even just basic economic bills because more progressive members of the Democratic House caucus were just not in favor of moving these kinds of incentives for large businesses. Earlier this year, in July, we saw the Democratic House campaign and finance chairs actually leave from those positions. They still ran, but they left from those positions over kind of horse trading regarding budget votes. They felt that House Speaker Joe Tate had gone back on his word when they were promised some level of a vote on dedicated long-term funding for school districts. And now you're seeing people like Rachel Hood outright saying, hey, if you're not going to play ball now, I'm done. So this has been an issue that the Democrats have really reckoned with for the last 2 years. And I think what we're seeing now is just kind of the explosion of that. Whereas, as Simon pointed out, because they had a trifecta, a lot of this was going on behind closed doors. We weren't privy to it. Now it seems like, as you mentioned, Rachel Hood, she was not reelected. She does have nothing to lose for bringing this forward. And I think her hope then is that if enough people do have the same mindset, I mean, we kind of saw a little bit of this out of State Representative Betsy Kofia, who did win re-election, just kind of outright calling out the fact that there are things to be voted on, things to be done. And leadership doesn't seem to have much of an appetite to do any of that, which then begs the question, are we going to see what we saw in 2022, where Republicans lost the House and the Senate, and effectively we had an incredibly lame duck because Republicans just did not want to move on any policy issues the rest of that year.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And what Democrats are starting to lose here is that central organizing principle. I think you can all recall at the beginning of this legislative session where Democrats were having the first trifecta in 40 years. They burst out of the gate with all this energy about all these things that they wanted to do. But the largest, most ambitious policy that they had were essentially reversals of things from Governor Rick Snyder's administration. You remember the repeal of right to work. They wanted to bolster protections for abortion access and so on. But after that happened, once they get past those, sort of promises made, promises kept stage, and there's they continue to have these slim majorities and more or less, a blank slate in terms of the policy that they want to write, how they want to reform government and move forward and develop policy of their own that might be ambitious or even sweeping. That's not something that we've really seen from this legislature. We've seen a lot of incremental policies. We haven't necessarily seen Democrats stepping up and taking a big, ambitious look at how can we reform state government. And, as we're petering out here, the question is going to be if they want, moving into 2026, they say, this is why you need to give us another shot at trifecta control. This is why we should be the people leading policymaking in Lansing. I think that they can't simply just say, hey, here are these things like Roe versus Wade, abortion access, or 10 years of Republican control in Lansing that we want to, move away from. I think they need to be able to have something that is saying, here's how we're going to move forward. Here's a policy that's going to substantively and tangibly improve the lives of Michigan residents.
Such an interesting point. Jordyn, if you're a Democratic voter, how frustrated should you be with what's happening or not happening in Lansing right now?
I suppose it's kind of a big picture thing, right? Obviously, Democrats did not win the presidency. They lost the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, and Michigan, the state house. There's a lot of soul searching going on in the party, from the most local forms of Democratic parties all the way to the National Democratic Party. A lot of Democrats are really frustrated right now, and you're seeing that, like we pointed out, with these lawmakers who are saying, hey, I am content to hold my vote, to do nothing, if I feel like constituent priorities aren't being met. And that was kind of a point of concern, I think, in the sort of days after the election, the autopsies that were going on as to what went wrong for Democrats. That was something that was pointed out by both Democrats and Republicans, was the indication or the feeling that House Democrats specifically played it a little too safe. They went big in 2023, and then, the go big or go home. It seems like they went home in 2024. And because of that, there are some folks who feel like there hasn't been much delivery from Democrats this year in particular. And, I'll give you an example. I was talking to even members of their own Democratic Party over in the Senate. There's a little bit of concern there that priorities and policies that they've sent over won't make it across the finish line because they don't even know what their colleagues in the other chamber are doing. And that's a point of concern for them as well, because they're now left scratching their heads and wondering if things, big and small, from firearm legislation to perhaps even like FOIA reform, Freedom of Information reform, a lot of people are questioning if that's even going to be something that has the capability to make it over the finish line. And these are things that Democrats have been wanting, or at least saying that they've wanted, for a while now.
Simon, let's flip the script here. So there are plenty of folks, good government folks, who say, look, nothing good ever happens after midnight or after Thanksgiving in the legislature, and lame duck sessions often go after midnight. So it's a twofer. So, 2018, the last time Republicans had a trifecta, complete control, the Republican legislature passed more than 300 bills in lame duck, and many of those were controversial, having to do with dark money and Bridgeline 5, the infamous votes to alter voter-initiated minimum wage and sick leave laws. You could argue, don't you think, a session without lame duck isn't such a bad thing. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people have complained about that. I mean, when Jordyn touches on the fact that this legislature met only 71 voting days this year, and we still have a full-time legislature with legislators taking a salary, right? There's a lot of complaints to be made about how time is being used. And it's interesting to see the bills that are coming up now at the very end of this legislative session as potential lame duck contenders. When you look at policing reforms to a potential ballot measure for bottle returns, and even expanding gun control measures with a voluntary do not sell list. These are all things that have been liberal wish list items for a long time, but are only coming in here at the last second. And it does sort of beg the question, where do these land within Democratic priorities? But at the same time, some of the backlog that we're seeing in lame duck here are things that, like, ethics reform, things that have been on the back burner for Democrats for a long time, even as advocates have pushed for them. And so while I think there's going to be at least a mix of some of these special interest oriented bills coming through, especially with that horse trading that can go on in these late night legislative sessions, I think it remains to be seen, or rather, I'm skeptical, I should say, that we're going to have any sort of level of frenzy akin to what we had at the end of 2018.
Okay, well, in the final few minutes that we have, let's do a little bit of a preview of what we think, if we think that there is legislation that can or will be passed. Rick mentioned tipped wage. There's economic incentive funding, polluter pay. Jordyn, let's start with you. I mean, is there anything specific that you're eyeing right now that you think they may take a go at?
So both from a professional standpoint, as well as just, a person who's interested in open government, I am frankly watching quite closely the bills to open up the governor's office and the legislature to Public Information Act requests. This is something that Governor Gretchen Whitmer ran on when first running for governor. It's something that she's had a lot of time to open up her office to, hasn't chosen to. Now bills are going through the state legislature. The Democrats are in charge of the House, Senate, and governorship. They have every ability to write these bills the way that they want and get them through with the votes that they have. The Senate, which had been a historic sort of stopping block for that policy, the Senate voted it through earlier this year, right before they left for their summer break. That has had no time in the House right now. I don't even believe it's gotten a committee hearing. Going to be watching that very closely, because if it dies now, I have very, very little hope that it is actually going to be made any kind of law, which is something that, frankly, Governor Gretchen Whitmer will have to address at some point, considering that she made government transparency, such a part of her running platform.
Simon, in the final minute or so that we have, let's look to you. What are you looking at?
What I'm really interested in is what's going to happen with Michigan's tipped wage heading into 2025. This is going to be something that would be far more thorny to address with a split legislature between Democrats and Republicans. And so Democrats have an opportunity with the slim margins that they have to essentially craft, on the two sides of this issue, whether the restaurant industry is going to get their way and essentially maintain status quo more or less, or if, the one fair wage folks, the folks that want to advocate for an elimination of the tipped wage so that restaurant workers have to also just be paid the minimum wage, whether that can move through. And right now, there's not a lot of indication. Governor Gretchen Whitmer has deferred. She's basically said, I want to see what the legislature is going to come up with. But I have to imagine that there's a lot of dealing behind closed doors right now in terms of a workable solution here. And there hasn't been a lot of indications one way or another how that's going to go.
Simon Schuster, Jordyn Hermani, Capitol reporters at Bridge, Michigan. It is always so good to have you guys on the show. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much.
And that is It's Just Politics for today. I am Zoe Clark.
And I am Rick Pluta.
And hey, next week is Thanksgiving, so we won't be here with you. But in all things gratitude, we are thankful for you.
We are.
And for mashed potatoes.